Today I'd like to talk about, a problem that confronts us all at one point or another. And that is, we found a great project, and folks have told us that rehab is the way to go. We want to perhaps flip the property or hold it for long term. It really doesn't make any difference because in this case work needs to be done. But where do you start? Well, first of all, it's conventional wisdom, of course, to contact contractors. And of course everybody says, well, you talk to three. They tell us, these contractors, they tell us what needs doing, and of course what it's going to cost. And sounds okay, but can we be sure we get what we pay for? Sometimes we do, but more often we don't. Experienced investors and rehabbers try to insulate themselves against losses. It makes sense. We're either business people, or we hope to be, and make a business out of this. And so, how do they try to cover themselves about getting what they pay for? Well, some are sufficiently concerned, perhaps feel they have the aptitude, and they hire their own crews. Maybe they run the job themselves on site, maybe every day. I used to go three times a week, writing checks as they go, or they follow industry standard construction practices. Well, that's important because, as we will discuss today, it's those construction practices that will keep everybody honest, and maybe at the end of the day the contractors are happy and you're happy and you got what you paid for. First of all, there are two primary documents. There are others, of course, lien waivers and other things we can talk about, but at the center of construction practices is a document they call scope of work. And what might that be? Well, architects, when they do plans and specifications, you might have noticed that on the first 1 or 2 or 3 pages, there'll be columns of typewritten information. And if you read that, that information is essentially a narrative description of the work to be done. And all the rest of the sheets are illustrations, where needed, of the work to be done. And it's useful. It is, for all practical purposes, it's the continuing reference for knowing the work's done right as specified. The second, that scope of work, my proposal to you is that there's no one who's going to do it for you. I don't think you want to hire a architect to do it for you. The general contractor may not have the capacity to sit down and write it, and nor be as thorough as you know that you need to be to have a step-by-step description of the work that needs to be done, together with the identification of just what products are going to be used, what equipment is going to be used, and so forth. The second major document, and we're not going to belabor this because you can study it. Took me my first project to get comfortable with it. But it's called a contractor's sworn statement. And when you borrow money from a lender, it could be a hard money lender, or it could be a conventional bank. You'd love to think they're just going to give you a check for your budget and just simply say, have at it. Well, unless it's a line of credit, that's not the way it's going to work. My experience was I went into the local bank there on the south side in Hyde Park, and they'd agreed to fund the rehab of this project. And so I was going in to get the first cash to get the work underway. And the loan officer, who over time became a good friend, says, well, where's your sworn statement? And I I was a former college admissions counselor, not a contractor. I didn't even know what he was talking about. But he reached into his drawer and he pulled out this document and he says, "Fill this out. Come on back, and numbers all add up. And we'll cut you a check." I said, well, what he was handing me looked like a spreadsheet on a legal-sized piece of paper. And you can go online and do a search for contractor's sworn statement, and forms and things will pop up to show you just what I'm describing. What that lender was telling me was, if I wanted to get the project started, I'm going to need a certain amount of money, and for all practical purposes, that was going to be the first of a series of payments that they were going to give me to run this job. And I came to understand that in common lingo, they call that a draw. So you can also call it a progress payment. In this case, this would be the first payment, and my use of it would be for deposits to tradesmen who were getting underway and getting work underway, having to buy materials and so forth. What that sworn statement is doing, during the course of a project, a small project, you might have 3 or even 4 draws, and because you don't go into the bank for each $120 you need to go to Home Depot and buy a few 5-gallon cans of paint. What they expect to see is identified all the trades that are going to be involved, and line item for line item, whether it's carpentry, plumbing, or electrical, what you propose to spend in fixing up that property. And it's what's called line item pricing. And in our classes, we will talk more about line item pricing because it's important. Line item pricing is the alternative to what many contractors are more inclined to give you, which is essentially a lump sum bid. Well, I'll do everything we talked about for $38,000, and I usually get a third down, and so I'll be looking for that check for $10,000 or $14,000, and we'll get underway. Well, that's not quite how it works in the real world among professionals. And this isn't, I wish I could say this is my invention, but I'm afraid, as I mentioned, I learned the hard way when I got that contractor's sworn statement and prepared my first draw. Heck, I did it on an IBM Selectric typewriter with lots of whiteout for my errors, and I probably spent a long evening doing it. Today we can either create our own, or we can download spreadsheets that'll do the math, which was just, I was working with a 4-function calculator, so pluses and minuses, subtraction and multiplication and division. That's what I worked with. I had my horse and buggy parked right out front, in case you were curious. But in any event, with those progress payments, it is a method for paying as you go. You call it a progress payment. They're making progress on the job. Well, that may include deposits to a tradesman in a given draw, or the first portion of what he expects to complete over 2 weeks' time. He needs money for materials to get underway, and he finishes the work and he expects to get his balance. Well, those would be 2 progress payments: the deposit and the final payment. I had my larger projects. I worked with plumbers for 6 months, and they every week I did a progress payment, and they were in, and it was a big job, so it was serious money. Those were progress payments, and we made out this sworn statement for each progress payment, not just for the plumber, but for everybody else who was expecting to get paid as well. So what it is, interestingly enough, this format, this line item pricing and the contractor's sworn statement, I found to be very useful in responding to a unsophisticated contractor's demand for simply a large portion of a ill-defined or undefined contract. Because in this case, I could go line item for line item and say, all right, what are you going to do this week? You're going to do the clean out and the demolition, and I guess we talked about that, and you said that you'd you're going to have to pay for a dumpster, and a dumpster is going to cost $450, and you figure it's going to cost about $500 for labor. So that's about $1,000 line item. I'm going to give you $500 today, and next week, work's all done, place is broom clean, I'll give you the other $500. And so same thing with every other tradesman in line. And so the second draw, he'd be getting his balance due, his other $500. So, but his lump sum request for a deposit also includes stuff that he's not going to be doing for 2 or 3 weeks. And it's not hard for them to figure out why I would object to giving them a third of a painting line item where they're not picking up a paintbrush on that job for another 3 weeks. So working with this method, you have a means for simply saying, all right, I'm going to give you a deposit on everything you're going to do in the next week to 10 days, and then we come back and we'll do it again for what you're going to do in the next 10 days, draw number 2. So I found that, and when you take a look at that spreadsheet with progress payments, because every progress payments, the numbers don't change unless you've agreed to change the numbers, but there'll be a column that says what the amount of the contract is on that line item, how much you paid him on the first draw, and then how much is to be paid now, and in a final column, the balance to become due. So if you think about it, while the math might be complicated because you're adding and subtracting horizontally across and up and down, because at the bottom then you've got the total amount of the contract as a whole. So the math can be challenging, and spreadsheets can help. It's not that hard today if you understand Excel to kind of make up your own spreadsheet. I've got one that I've made up that I would just distribute to students in the classes that I teach. And I know CIC in Chicago, when I went looking for spreadsheets, contractor's sworn statement, popped up a self-filling with the math included document from CIC that could simply be downloaded. So you might check that out. As I implied, the line items, they're not cast in stone. I mean, if halfway through you've decided to drywall the attic and it's going to take another 30 sheets of drywall at $35, $40 a sheet, well, you can adjust the line item and you would increase it for that additional amount. What he's already been paid doesn't change, but the balance to become due, perhaps even in the next draw, is going to be increased substantially. So it can be a flexible document. If along the way there's something that you agree to and you don't do, you can credit yourself and the subtotals reduce accordingly. So finally, what you end up with, and that's what's important, and that's why we do it, is that you end up with a notarized record of all the payments made, and on his and on your contractor's side, all the payments received. And if there's ever any dispute as to what any balance is owed, well, you've got this chain of documents that signed on both sides that indicate just what has been paid, and any balance due when the guy walked off the job, or you had a falling out. In any event, you've got a rolling record, and trust me, and this is exactly the documents in the protocol that your lender is going to require, because they're not going to give you all the money. They're going to say, come in for draw number 1, and if it's a small project, maybe it'll just be a total of 3 draws, but whatever form they use, it's going to resemble, or in fact be, a contractor's sworn statement. So finally, these 2 documents, the scope of work, which truly describes exactly the work to be done, and the contractor's sworn statement, which tracks the funds expended and establishes the understanding that you're simply going to pay for the work as it is completed, and there'll always be a record, and if deposits are needed, deposits can be granted on a line item by line item basis as the work continues. So it's these 2 mechanisms are a way to getting somewhat predictable pricing. that scope of work becomes a document you might put in the hands of 3 different contractors and say, I appreciate your advice, but this is what we're going to do on this job. So line item for line item, task by task, electrical versus plumbing versus whatever, you give me your price. That way, 2 or 3 contractors arguably are bidding the same work. They're not bidding their version of what they think ought to be done. And that's where the problem comes in with multiple contractors if you don't set up a mechanism, a format for them to submit their bids. So these 2 documents, they eliminate confusion over what's being paid for, when, and how. And if this... Well, I trust that it is of interest to you because, believe me, without observing these protocols, you are asking for a world of grief. And it's important that you understand the protocols because the majority of the small contractors you're apt to hire, they've never seen a contractor's sworn statement. And if you ask them to prepare a scope of work, they'll give you some sort of handwritten document that says, well, in the dining room, I'm going to fix the ceiling, I'm going to add 2 electrical outlets, I'm going to sand the floor, and I'm going to paint it. That doesn't help you. How can you pay him for that? Because he's not doing all those things at the same time. What you will pay him for is the percentage of completion on the electrical work for the job as a whole. And that's how it works. So if you're unfamiliar with these documents conceptually or in fact, then I don't think it's self-serving for you to, you have to study it. I learned it the hard way over a period of the first year or so I was in the business, or take my construction practices workshop and my budgeting workshop and the other ones I've developed to guide you through this with minimum pain and try as much as possible to assure that you have a great outcome. So this is Phil Elmes trying to help you get what you pay for. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk soon.